Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hello, in-person audience and virtual online audience on ResNet. I'm excited to have Ron Becker here to speak to us today. So Ron is a professor in computer science, now an emeritus professor in computer science at the University of Toronto, where he helped founded the DGP group. Now he works primarily in the Technologies for Aging Gracefully lab there. And Ron's been recognized by many organizations in the US and Canada for his pioneering work, both first in computer graphics and then later moving into HCI. And Jonathan Gruden, who is our sort of resident HCI historian, has provided me with this exciting trivia fact about Ron Becker, which you may not know, which is that he is the progenitor of the one Chi Academy family that strings across 4 generations, which consists of Ron Becker, and then his protege, Bill Buxton, and his protege, Brad Myers, and his protege, James Landay. So that is a good piece of Chi trivia for you to keep in mind. And we're lucky to have Ron this week. He's in town for the ACM Assets Conference, which is taking place next week, where he's going to be giving the keynote address. And so we're lucky that we're going to get a glimpse of that for those of us who will not be able to attend Assets. So thanks, Ron.
Sorry, I'm just resetting my clock to 0 so I can see it. Thanks, Mary. It's always, I seem to get here to give a talk about every 4 or 5 years, which gives a good rhythm to my life. The anecdote about descendants in the Chi Academy, the full story is I'm probably the only person thus far, maybe for a long time, who was preceded into the Chi Academy by his academic child and academic grandchild, although indeed I did precede James Landay into the academy. So anyway, there are some advantages to age. I'm not sure how many there are. Okay, so I hope this will be moderately interactive. If it gets too interactive, in recognition of the fact that this is late Friday afternoon, I'll start to decrease questions, and apparently I am being webcast to various MSR research campuses all over the world. Although how many people might be watching me now in Beijing or Bangalore or wherever the other one is remains to be seen, given the time difference. So there's apparently no way in which those of you who are remote for me to know how many such people there are, or what you're thinking, or what you want to ask. But in the room is Mary Morris, is Jonathan Gruden, is Mary Serwinski, is Gina Vanolia, and a bunch of other people that I don't recognize. So certainly feel free to text questions to them. And I've seen a lot of proxies today, video conferencing proxies. So I hope these 4 individuals will agree to be question proxies. This is, as Mary implied, a second rehearsal of the keynote address I'm going to give Monday. And I've made, I believe, some improvements from the rehearsal I did on Tuesday, and hopefully you'll enjoy it and find it provocative. I was a little hesitant in using the words mind and soul in a title for a computer science audience, but at my age I figured I could get away with it. And the work that I'm going to describe from my own lab, and I'm going to try to cast my net a lot wider than just our work, is of course the work of many people. And the names you see there are just the names of the current people in the lab. And there's probably an equal number, probably 2 times as many who've been part of the lab in the last 10 years. It was only named 4 years ago, but I started doing this line of work about 11 or 12 years ago as I could see the 60 milestone looming close on my horizon. And I said, well, it's about time to do this kind of thing before I need it. So I'm going to be speaking at Assets on Monday. And so I thought I'd take a look at what the current Assets conferences think about what accessibility is and what areas are being worked on. And I found it very interesting. I only went back 3 years looking at the session titles. I didn't look at the posters, and I didn't look at individual paper titles from 2011 through 13, and found that issues of vision impairment was by far the largest focus of attention at Assets. Surprisingly small number dealing with hearing challenges, 3 dealing with mobility and wayfinding, 3 dealing with aging, and a number of others. And so what I want to do first of all is just talk about very, very briefly the huge advances that have been made in those kinds of accessibility. Certainly dealing with visual challenges, there's been huge advances made in terms of things like screen readers, audio description, descriptive video, turning a moving image into some kind of textual description of what's going on in the moving image, as well as sonification, turning visual images into non-speech audio. All of these are an example of what I would call sensory substitution, or the recreation of something in a visual modality into another modality. And there's been a lot of work on haptic displays. And what's of course interesting to recognize in this work is that there are no uniform universal solutions. So people who have acuity problems, those issues are very different from those who have glaucoma, very different from those who have macular degeneration. So the technical solutions need to have a fair amount of subtlety. There's also been a lot of work in hearing challenges. In other words, taking auditory phenomena, sounds, and turning them into, for example, captions or sign language. And this, the use of captions is, of course, interesting because it illustrates what some people call the curve cut effect, but it illustrates the fact that advances that are made for issues of accessibility often benefit those whose faculties are normal. So for example, I normally can hear things, but if I go into a sports bar, I can barely hear the person next to me, much less something that's coming off the screen. So if there are captions on the screen, I can read something about who's winning the baseball game or whatever. And thank you for coming to hear me instead of watching the Red Sox and the Tigers, who I think are going on now. I hope this doesn't mean people all over Microsoft immediately leave your desk and go turn on your TVs. There's also interesting new work being done in haptic displays. There's a small Toronto company called Tactile Audio Displays that has built a chair called the Emoda chair, which turns music into vibrations on your back. And so again, this is an attempt to substitute things in one sensory medium to another. There's also been a lot of work on mobility and wayfinding, including smart canes, smart wheelchairs, etc. But what about seniors? Are these the crucial issues for seniors? This question is interesting because seniors are getting more and more prevalent in our population. And the most striking data point that I've seen since I got interested in this issue was from the UN in a 2004 report in which they said that in 1950, 5% of the world's population was over 65. In 2050, it'll be up to 16%. And by 2300, should the world last that long, it'll be up to 32%, which basically means that assuming you're not a senior and you're randomly distributed among other people, if you look to the right of you and look to the left of you, one of the 3 of you will be a senior citizen. So that's quite staggering. And in fact, the percentage of seniors will pass the percentage of children, defining children, I believe, as under 15, and seniors as over 65. That could happen in 2 or 3 years. Okay, so the world is starting to look like a very different place. The good news is that, of course, if we're healthy and if we have things to enjoy in our life, in principle, we can enjoy them a lot longer. And the bad news is that we have all sorts of obstacles to enjoying life, ranging from things that are clearly defined as physical and neurological conditions like Alzheimer's disease or aphasia resulting from stroke, difficulties in speaking, or Parkinson's, shaking, or things like that. And also, of course, blindness, deafness, poor mobility, etc., the issues that the accessibility community has worked on very hard, but also things that you could view as psychological or social barriers to leading a healthy life, such as isolation, loneliness, vulnerability, et cetera, things that the medical community is not always willing to recognize is a disease or a condition that the medical community needs to deal with. So the question is, can technology help with any of this? And if so, addressing what needs? I like taxonomies. And I like my style of work in new areas, and I've changed fields several times in my career, is to start dabbling in things, trying various things, and then I try to pull back a little bit and say, is there some sort of systematic formalism or framework or structure in which I can categorize pieces of work? And a couple of years ago, 4 years ago maybe, I ran across a paper by psychologist Abraham Maslow, written, I believe, in 1944. And Maslow argued that there was a hierarchy of human needs, starting at the lowest level with physiological needs, things like we need oxygen to breathe, we need water to drink, etc. If we don't have that, we're going to die. And then moving up somewhat higher to the level of safety, security, to the next layer he called actually the need for love, affection, a sense of belonging, family, friends. The fourth layer he defined was what he called esteem, the need to feel good about yourself and your capabilities, to be able to engage meaningfully with the world. And the fifth level, which is perhaps the fuzziest, was what he called self-actualization, the need for fulfillment, a cause, some reason to exist, some higher purpose. And what I want to do today is argue, and I'm not going to argue it at length, but I'm going to assume it, that when I talked in my title about the mind, the heart, and the soul, I'm going to equate the love layer with things of the heart, the esteem layer with things of the mind, and the soul layer with the self-actualization layer with the soul, and hence my title. So the opportunity for us is to identify needs that somehow fit into this taxonomy or this space, and then come up with technological solutions. And there are probably more than 4 categories, but the 4 I find most interesting are diagnostic, prosthetic, rehabilitative, or preventative. And the easiest way to explain that is to use the example. Let's say that you're out skiing on, I don't know, where do people ski here? Mount Baker? Do you ski at Mount Baker? Or is it, I don't know, there's places to ski. And so imagine you have an accident and you don't know whether in fact you've broken your ankle or you've just twisted it or sprained it. So you might go have an x-ray, that's a diagnostic instrument, and that'll tell you, yes, you broke something. If in fact you broke something or you severely injured it, you will have a prosthesis, in other words, something that compensates for this loss, whether it's a cast or a crutch. If then you start to get stronger, you may see a physiotherapist, and that's a rehabilitative system to strengthen the ankle. And then finally, you might think, and particularly if the person who had the skiing accident is, a reckless 17-year-old male or something, their parents might say to them, well, if you had gone down the mountain a little slower, and not been also talking on your cell phone, you might not have had the accident in the first place. So, and that's what one would call a preventative intervention. And so those are the kinds of things we can look for in this area. And what's important to realize is that any technology intervention that we develop should be and can be informed by medicine and the health sciences, and in turn, as we do technological interventions, they often give us new insights into the disease or the condition or the disability that one is attempting to deal with. And so our lab, which is called the TAG Lab, Technologies for Aging Gracefully Lab, mantra, research for the journey through life, tries to design and develop technology to make seniors and their families smarter, more capable, resourceful, and independent. And it's very different. I'm an HCI person, and this is different from people who work in the same field who come from AI and computer vision, who often try to make machines smarter to watch over seniors, to ensure that something bad doesn't happen. And I'm not here to argue that one approach is better than the other. In fact, we try to build as much smartness, intelligence into the things we build as well. But we come to this in my lab from the HCI approach. And so what we try to do is to think where technology could serve human needs and to envision, design, build, test, improve, and commercialize solutions for a variety of conditions, including what sometimes quaintly called normally aging senior citizens. And so the outline of what I'm going to do in the next 40 minutes or so is to go through these 5 layers and talk about a little bit of work in each layer. In some cases, talk about the work of others. In some cases, talk about work from our lab, and then wrap up with some general thoughts that can be drawn out of all the layers. And I'm certainly willing to take questions at any time. So starting with the layer of health, this is an area where there's been lots of work. One phenomenon that particularly interests me is the increasing proliferation of authoritative information sources, or apparently authoritative information sources about health on the web. And this includes information from government-sanctioned websites such as PubMed Health to very well-known and distinguished and authoritative hospital websites such as the Mayo Clinic, and more commercial websites such as WebMD. And you see here 3 snapshots of information about prostate gland enlargement there. There's another phenomena which approaches this from a different point of view, which is not the authoritative summary pronouncements about certain conditions that are defined by medical science, but the more anecdotal, here's what happened to me when I had my brain surgery, or here's what happened to me when somebody close to me passed away, or whatever. What happened to you? These are social media for health. Here's an example from mybraintumorcommunity.org. And this all, in my view, is good for us as intelligent consumers of health information. It leads to challenges such as, how do you decide what's correct, what to believe in, and also how do you encourage the medical system and medical practitioners to spend some of their time, and this is more of a problem in Canada than in the States, because in Canada everybody gets health care, but there's increasingly little time for everybody. Whereas here, if you have more money, you can get you can get better health care, and you probably have a better chance here to say to your doctor, okay, I need 10 minutes for you to explain to me why I shouldn't worry about all the drug interactions that I saw on this Wikipedia site, why I should take this in confidence. In Canada, you probably won't be lucky enough to find an MD can do it, but you will certainly get, you don't have to worry about what happens with healthcare if you're poor. Another area is monitoring physical fitness for health. These are slides about a device called Fitbit, which a lot of people wear, which gives them information about motion in 3 dimensions and allows them to monitor their activities. And then another thing that I think is particularly interesting is the number of seniors now who are either keeping We Fit or keeping connected. and using some of these technologies for encouraging exercise with things like Wii bowling, which I mean, I don't know how many seniors play Wii bowling, but certainly that kind of activity is getting more and more common. So that's all I want to say about physiological needs. I now just have one slide about monitoring for safety, and that's the next slide. And I just want to mention two what I think are outstanding pieces of work. One is from the Seattle area, and in fact, I believe I saw Shwetak Patel wandering around the halls upstairs. So he's done beautiful work on technology which you can either attach to your electrical circuits or to your hydraulic circuits in the home, and they could be used for things like making inferences such as, well, for the last 2 years, there have been electrical pulses around 9 o'clock every morning from two places in the kitchen that could plausibly be the toaster and the coffee pot. Nothing like this has happened for 2 or 3 days. Either the person has gone away or maybe there's something wrong and we should take a look. And similarly for fluid flow, dealing with issues like sinks and toilets and things. And this is, I understand, now being commercialized by a company, I think it's called Belkin. So in the upper left, you see some images taken from some of the Belkin literature. Work from Toronto that I find very interesting and that uses state-of-the-art computer vision and machine learning is from Alex Michaelides in Toronto Occupational Health Sciences, as well as Toronto Rehab Institute. And that's designed for that. I don't know to what extent in this area they sell the device where the television ad is, I've fallen and I can't get up. Okay, and that works very well in the cases where you remember to carry it with you. It doesn't fall out of your hand when you fall down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what Alex has done is he's built some technology which sits on the ceiling, and I think you can see it in this, let's see, oh, actually I have a pointer there. You can see it up there. And if this is an actual scene down here, it normalizes it and gets the raw image, and then it does some silhouette detection and is able to say, it looks like you're falling. Would you like help, et cetera. And so this is, these are good examples of where smart computer vision and smart machine learning and AI really can be greatly beneficial. Okay, I now want to move, and you'll notice at the bottom of some of these slides, I'm showing where I am in the outline of the talk. So I'm now moving to the third level of the hierarchy, love needs. And so I want to start with a question, in part because I hate a talk that's just a monologue, even if I'm the monologuer. So can anyone here tell an anecdote? It need not be someone you personally know. It could be a friend of a friend, something you read. But something about somebody who's isolated, lonely, vulnerable, and what the implications of that for their life has been. Yeah, Mary?
Well, it's usually severely negative. And
Okay.
ending in death, right?
Yeah. So anyway, these situations are clearly negative. There's an image here of a happy couple Skyping one another, and not everyone is in a position to do that. And so, and in fact, there are large collections of cases in which this is an issue. So not every senior living alone is lonely and isolated, or isolated and lonely, but many of them are. Many people who are in long-term hospital care, I'll get back to hospice care towards the end of my talk, a large collection that's recognized perhaps and undervalued by society are 724 homebound caregivers. People, like someone who's 68 years old, who's got a partner who's 74 years old and who has dementia, and you don't have a lot of money and you can't hire people to come in to take care of the person, and you're stuck there day and night. You don't have kids who are nearby, et cetera, et cetera. People who are in long-term hospital, it doesn't have to be seniors, it could be people who are just hospitalized for a long term because of some surgery, or rehab, or quarantined, or individuals with chronic pain. There's statistics would say that the number of people with chronic pain in North America is something like 25%. This is pain that persists for longer than 3 months, which is just a staggering number that I never believed was as serious until I started talking with Diane Grimala of Simon Fraser, whose essentially life work is technology for chronic pain. And so this often applies to individuals who may or may not live alone, have relatively small and perhaps shrinking social networks, may also have sensory or motor impairments, which makes it less, and often have little control over how they feel or their availability for conversation at a particular moment. So for example, if you're in a hospital bed and even as something as little as, can you talk on the telephone? Many hospital beds don't provide a telephone next to you, and you may have to summon someone, a nursing staff, in order to talk on the telephone or do something. So that can be a serious issue. So we've gotten interested in this issue when we've surveyed the issue of video communications, and being here today has been very interesting, as it was 4 or 5 years ago when I was here. There's sort of lots of technology around for synchronous video chat, commercially, Skype, Google Hangouts, etc. There's the research frontier, and I put research frontier in quotes because, in fact, in the CSCW community, people at Belcor was doing this 20 years ago with video windows, and I understand video windows have been quite controversial at MSR. But the notion that you had a way to imagine as if you were living next door to your children, and you could, and there was a window literally between the two buildings, and if both of you agreed and pulled up the blind, you could communicate with video and audio interaction. So that's what video windows, and a person named Tajinder Judge did some very nice work on this called Family Window and Family Portals a few weeks ago. We've chosen not to start with synchronous or always on video, but with asynchronous communication or video messages, in part because we've been very influenced by the fact that people are not necessarily always available for conversation when you want. And we thought the notion of just saying, hey, I'm thinking of you, get in touch was very valuable. And so what we've done is we've built some prototypes over the last few years. We've done a lot of interviews, focus groups, and observations in a variety of settings. People living at home with chronic pain, individuals in a complex continuing care hospital where they're in for very serious conditions and in fact often don't leave, as well as we've been working with a company that owns retirement homes and long-term care nursing homes, and we've been doing interviews and observations there. And we've developed a set of design principles which, if the gods smile upon us and a random number generator is dialed in the correct way, you might get to hear at CHI 2014, but if not, we'll submit it somewhere else. As I said, we start with asynchronous interaction, and our goal is to build from there. And our goal is to build something that looks like an appliance and that doesn't look like another program on a computer. And so I'm going to show you a few early prototypes, and this video does have narration, so if I can find the start.
Prototypes of technology designed to aid communications by isolated individuals who may be lonely or vulnerable. Families in Touch by Elaine Macarenis and Tariq Shepar introduce the metaphor of a digital communicating picture frame. Jessica David's Ringo advanced the concept further. Here her grandfather sends out a thinking of you message from his picture frame by touching it. Jessica receives it and records a video greeting to Grandpa, mentioning that her dad, his son, would also send a greeting.
Hey Grandpa, just got out of class. It's really beautiful here in Toronto and it's becoming fall. Dad wants to send you a video of the dog later, so hopefully you get that. Talk to you later. Bye.
Grandpa then receives and watches both videos.
Hey Grandpa, just got out of class. It's really beautiful here in Toronto as it's becoming fall. The leaves are really pretty.
Jake, what does Jake want? Jake, what does Jake want? Huh? What does Jake want? Can we go outside? Oh, Jake, what does Jake want?
Teeth by Mark Fime and Uzma Khan explores a different way of controlling the device in a different context of use. Uzma's dad, here pretending to be in a hospital bed, commands the communications appliance by gesturing to the other side of the room. He can send requests to a nurse elsewhere in the hospital or send messages to family.
So that was that last demo was done with a Microsoft Connect. And the images on the right are images out of the current prototype In Touch, which does something very similar to Ringo, and we hope to start testing with seniors in retirement homes and long-term care starting in January. There are lots of, this is a lovely domain to work on. There are lots of different research challenges or opportunities. One is, what's the metaphor you use? We started with a picture frame. Originally, my idea had been to do this through television because the work was motivated by visiting my sister in a long-term care facility in the last couple of years of her life, where she got increasingly isolated and lonely. And I imagined the TV, everyone in a bed, often two TVs in a room with twin beds, had their TVs on, and I imagined the TV stopping and a voice coming out, "We interrupt this mindless drivel from CNN with a message from your son. Hi, Mom, it's Neil. She went golfing yesterday, shot 3 birdies," et cetera, et cetera. So we've been looking at picture frames, TV screens. We believe that, in fact, all 3 of the communication modalities, synchronous, asynchronous, and always on, are relevant, and the question is how to use them together in some elegant way. And although we started with touch, we are interested, as you saw in the Keith video, in gesture, but for the moment I've put that on hold because we wanted to explore voice as the second modality, because we think that's probably the most important one besides touch. Okay, before I go on to the next topic, I would be happy to take a question here or a comment if anyone has one, and then I'll continue. Okay, so the next area I want to talk about, I classify under esteem needs, although in fact it sort of bridges communication and thinking, and that's having trouble to communicate and to speak. And we started out working with technology that we developed for stroke survivors who had aphasia. But more recently, we've started to think about another kind of impairment or disability that affects a lot of people, including seniors, particularly new immigrants, which is dealing with English as a second language. And again, if anyone wants to share an anecdote or a story about someone they know who's had a stroke, or a child with autism spectrum disorder, or someone you know who's an immigrant who has trouble with English, I'd be happy to make this a little more participatory, and if not, I can certainly go on. But I'll give you a few seconds to pipe up if anyone wants to say something, because I find that these stories often sort of bring it to home. Okay, so once again, there are commercial products here that are making a difference. The fact that now you can get speech synthesis that sounds almost human is a big step. The image you see on the upper right of this screen is the collection of materials that a stroke survivor named Bill used to work with to help himself communicate as he wandered around Toronto. What's hard to see in this is I think it's this note. Well, no, I'm not. I don't know where it appears here, but he actually has, the most important thing are not all these maps and business cards and things, but a book that he put together that's essentially 2,000 words and phrases that he finds the most useful for his communication. It includes things like stories of what his kids are doing and stories, things he wants to do in informal social interaction, as well as things like I had my stroke while being on the subway, etc. Now, you have to remember that Bill is no ordinary stroke survivor. I mean, if you rated people in their intelligence and their fortitude to try to say, I'm not going to be beaten by this, I suspect Bill is in the upper 1 percentile or more. I mean, he's an engineer. He basically said, after he pulled himself together again and he realized he couldn't remember words and he could barely articulate them, he said, I'm going to beat this. And so your average stroke survivor isn't capable of doing that. And so my lab spun out a company called My Voice, which has an application called Talk Rocket Go, which basically brings up words that seem to be relevant in specific contexts and either allows you to see them on the screen or will speak them out with a speech synthesizer. In terms of language aids, there are of course things like Rosetta Stone. I don't know what TV is like here, but you can't watch television in Toronto without seeing a Rosetta Stone ad. But none of the commercial products really deal with what we think is the most serious problem or opportunity, which is supporting user needs in situ or situated learning. In other words, how do you help the person by somehow zeroing in on the vocabulary that might be most relevant, as opposed to forcing them to look through a whole dictionary? And so My Voice started working on that, and they have some of that in their commercially available product. But I have a PhD student, Carrie Demons-Epp, who's 3/4 of the way through now, who's doing a beautiful job, I think, with a technology called Vocab Nomad, which thinks about, like the My Voice technology did, in terms of vocabularies that are spatially relevant, and we call them locabularies. And so if you, to understand the idea, if you're in a doctor's office, there's a particular set of words that are more relevant for that condition than if you're at a movie theater, and that's going to differ again than if you're in a Starbucks. That's not to say that in a Starbucks you couldn't talk about the movie you just saw or your forthcoming doctor's appointment, but still the most critical things in a doctor's office are words like nurse, appointment, blood test, and things, and the most critical things in a Starbucks are things like black, double, I don't know, do they use that in the States, or is that just a Canadian phrase, double? Donut, croissant, et cetera. And so, and I don't have a video of this, unfortunately, and I decided to stop showing the My Voice video. You see here, and it's hard to see, 3 screenshots from Vocab Nomad. The upper left screenshot shows you some of the interface for helping to tailor vocabularies on a desktop machine. And here someone's working on the milk vocabulary, including things like, or the liquids vocabulary, 1% milk, 2% milk, 7-Up, etc. Down in the bottom left, you see the notion of chunks of vocabulary that are relevant in particular situations. And so here you see an portable vocabulary chunk, or I think of them as vocabulary books, for numbers, for colors, for parts of the body. And the upper right, Carrie demonstrated this at an artificial intelligence education conference recently, which was in Memphis. And so she tried it, and it knew she was in Memphis, and it came up with American South, Baptist, Memphian, etc., which wasn't bad. And I asked whether it would come up with Elvis, and she said, oh, Elvis came, a couple as the 6th term, etc. So that's not too bad. Johnny Cash, maybe. I don't know. I've never been to Memphis. But so again, in this area, we have huge research challenges, as do others in the community. There's the classic problem from computers in learning, which is how do you track learner progress and intervene appropriately? There's the automatic vocabulary problem, which we've barely scratched the surface of. There's what I'll call the social media for speech production problem. Not only the idea that there could be vocabulary books that could be contributed by people in the community, but the notion that you might be in a particular situation and send out a message over the internet to say, I'm having trouble saying this, could someone help me? And the question is how quickly you could get an answer back. There's lovely work that was reported at Chi by Erin Brady. Did she work with you? Yeah. Jeff Bingham's student, of basically taking a picture of things like medications and things, this is for blind people, and saying over the internet, can you help me? What am I looking at? And so the use of social media to help people with not only visual challenges, but speaking challenges, et cetera, sounds very, very interesting. Okay, so I have a couple more things to talk about. Any questions or comments here before? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is being able to read, and I won't. I'll skip the exercise of trying to get you to talk now. So I know it's Friday afternoon. It's been a long week. Did you have Monday off here also? No, you didn't have Monday off. Okay, in Canada we had Monday off for Thanksgiving, although we ate so much that we've been sluggish all week. So we've gotten very interested in the problem of helping people read, and this I believe is important or compelling because look at all the ebooks out there. I mean, you're sitting in Seattle here, and you've got Kindles, and I forget, does Microsoft have its own ebook yet, or not yet? No, you have an investment in Nook, is it? Yeah, Nook and whatever. But anyway, most of the ebooks don't seem to pay attention to people with disabilities, whether or not it pays lip service to it because you can enlarge type, but it doesn't do it in a terribly sophisticated way. And the research community has started to look at this, but not nearly enough. The most exciting piece of research that I've seen is by Hayes Raffel, who's he was in Nokia. Is he still there? Is he?
They made a startup company on this.
Oh, they made a startup company on this.
Yeah,
Okay.
a bunch of them left Nokia to do a startup around
Oh, good. Okay, well, I need to find out about this. Anyway, I thought this was just lovely work where you essentially combine desktop video conferencing with a shared book that can be synchronized at either end, at least two-party. I don't know whether they've done multi-party, but two-party is really the sweet spot. And this was very clever because it also had an agent that would come in and start making cute or intelligent comments, trying to get people to talk if they weren't already talking. And I think this is lovely work. Anyway, so we've started to think about what we can do for ebooks for reading, and we came up with one of the world's worst names, the Accessible Large Print Listening and Talking ebook, ALT. And the idea was to be able to deal with, the original idea was to build sort of the equivalent of a talking book and a large print book. Okay, so it could enlarge the type, but it could also read it aloud. And those two technologies, talking books and large print books, seem to be different technologies. But also we figured that it could be a little smarter than that. It could not only talk, but it could listen. And that would enable it to be able to, so you could read for somebody, you could record a play with people taking different parts, or you could read and then the person could listen to it again. So I'll just show you a video we made a little while ago about ALT. ALT is an app that helps people read by themselves and together with family members. Like an electronic large print book, type can be enlarged for individuals whose vision is poor. It can also be shown on a high-def display or TV for family viewing. Like books on tape, the text is read aloud for people who are blind.
She is always the woman. I have seldom heard him mentioned or under any
Alt
other
is synthesizing the
name.
voice.
In his eclipses and
This is not just for pre-recorded books, but for any digitized text. Alt is accessible to people with motor challenges such as occurs in MS and Parkinson's. It can be controlled by this mobile keyboard or a connected keyboard that also provides a stand for the iPad.
It was not that he felt any emotion akin to love for Irene Adler. All emotions, and that one particularly, were abhorrent to his cold, precise but admirably balanced mind.
Alt can also access 1 million books via the Internet Archive. So let's pick the category Children's Literature English, and we find Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and we'll download that. Family members can read books aloud to Alt users. Readings are recorded and can later be heard by the user.
'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths outgraved.
And now you're going to play it back.
Jabberwocky.
'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths.
So this is an area where we're just really getting started, and the interesting opportunities are to think about sort of the old classic space-time taxonomies of from CSCW literature, and think about people reading together at the same time, at different times, face-to-face or across space. And this we believe has a lot of opportunity, again, for seniors who are isolated and lonely, in order to embed social interaction in a cognitively interesting task space. So the last part of my talk is, now I want to go up to self-actualization, the soul. And we started this work about 8 or 9 years ago. And I was working with a social worker, Elsa Marziali, who worked at a place called Baycrest that has a lot of residents who have dementia. She had done a little project in which she had made a little 15-minute video of somebody's life, and it seemed to really be valuable to them to look back at the video. And so we managed to get some Alzheimer's Association money to look at it more systematically. And so our project was called Multimedia Biographies, and it was really targeted at the very large number of people who, at the moment, there's about 40 million people with dementia worldwide. And the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease. About 85% of cases of dementia are Alzheimer's disease. And that's supposed to grow to 66 million or more by 2030. And there's also a new condition that's only been recognized in the last 10 years called mild cognitive impairment, in which you start to have memory problems and some issues of confusion and disorganization that doesn't detect or measure as Alzheimer's disease, but in 50% of the cases, if you're diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, within 4 years you'll be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So these are people who are very aware of the precariousness of life and anxious to do what they can to, not to prolong it, but to enjoy it and to possibly preserve their history for their families, et cetera, et cetera. So we worked with 12 people over 3 years of the project, half of them with MCI and half of them with moderate or mild Alzheimer's disease. And we sent out so-called multimedia biographers who worked with these individuals typically for about 6 months, but very intermittently, to sit down and say, well, what's the story of your life? Now, in 8 of the 12 cases, we worked with surrogates for the individuals, adult children, for example. In 4 of the cases, 4 of the 6 cases with MCI, we worked with the individuals who were still healthy enough to say, I want to tell my own story. And so we had to work with them to figure out what is the story of their life. and then go out and capture and digitize all sorts of past archival material, photographs in a shoebox, old Super 8 cartridges, et cetera, sometimes shooting new material. Mike Massimi did a lovely project as an intern at MSR Cambridge 6 years ago maybe, in which he did a project like this, also using SenseCam to help capture new imagery. And so we did this. One of the things we wanted to show is that this was practical to do, to develop something that would be valued by the individuals and the families without the expense of, imagine Scarlett O'Hara coming to the end of her life and saying, okay, well, gee, I'd like Rhett and insofar as he still cares, or others, to remember what my life is like. Okay, we'll make Gone with the Wind as the story of my life. Okay, now that I think would cost $300 million or something like that. So we wanted to show that this could be done by undergraduates in various disciplines. They didn't have to be trained cinematographers, with about 100 hours of time. So let me show you two examples, very, very edited down. This woman was brought here from South Africa 5 years roughly before this video was shot. This work was done by Tara Hain, who some of you may know, because she works at Microsoft in one of the product development groups. And Ms. F is sort of reflecting on her life while watching, in some sense, the story of her life come in front of her.
I lived there.
Yeah, you did.
So if I hadn't edited it down as much, you'd see numerous examples of her saying like, oh, Table Mountaintop, oh, et cetera, et cetera. She recognizes names, places, faces, but she also re-experiences or remembers feelings. It was very good to live there. The real payoff of this proved to be when individuals watch these with adult children typically, or with partners. And so here you see Ms. Z, also with mid-stage Alzheimer's, watching the story of her life with her daughter, who's also the narrator of the video. And you'll hear the daughter both recorded and live.
This is you in one of Grandpa's suits. Really a stunning suit. What an excellent couturier designer he was.
That was very important to my mother.
Here you are looking so beautiful.
Catherine Hepburn, you look like.
And she goes laughing for another 20 seconds or 30 seconds.
My father used to sing it to us.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You never know with you how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
So the power of this for reconnecting and encouraging conversation is really quite compelling. As with every one of these topics, there's still many, many research challenges. To what extent can we use new technologies such as SenseCam, or I guess the Vicon Review now, or Glass to capture new video material? To what extent can we use social media to gather raw material together and then somehow combine it into what's really important, which is transforming individual memories and experiences into stories, which I believe is what all of this is all about. I now want to just say very briefly about, so if you think about preserving your identity as you reach critical stages of life in terms of your physical health and your mental health, what about the end of life? And I just have one slide about this. My PhD student, Mike Massimi, currently in the second year of an internship at MSR Cambridge, has really been a pioneer in thinking about this, actually coined a phrase, thanatos-sensitive design. Thanatos is the Greek god of death. And the idea is to think about how to design technologies and systems and environment that acknowledge the fact that we're not going to be here forever. And so what you see here is a screenshot from a wonderful website developed by a friend of mine, Kathy Castor. It's called Best Endings. And it's the goal of the website is to encourage you to think, talk, learn, plan, and share about what she describes there as the shocking realization: 100% of us are going to die. Other kinds of work in the area, and I don't have time to go through the papers in detail, but in the forthcoming CSCW conference 2014, there's a paper by someone named Ferguson, who I believe is a grad student at McGill, and Karen Moffat and Mike Massimi and one other person, that talks about technology in hospice care. Hospice care is a setting in which you basically acknowledge that someone is near the end, but you're trying to make them as comfortable as possible. And we've been particularly interested in that in my group, is that the kind of video connection technology that we're talking about with InTouch might be relevant in hospice care. And then Mike in CSCW 2013 published a paper that talks about, can technology be relevant after there's been a death in terms of online bereavement support. So we've been doing this kind of work for about 11 years now, only the last 4 or 5 under the name Nametag Lab. When I started, I thought we were dealing with memory prostheses, because in fact one of the things that got me started was reading a classic paper from, I'm blocking the name of the fellow, he used to be at Europark and now lives in Silicon Valley. Anyway, it was towards an electronic memory prosthesis. It was written about 1990, and I read it again about 2000, and I said, boy, we haven't gotten too far, have we? And so, but I've now realized, as we've done this work together with collaborators from the health sciences, et cetera, that it's not just about memory and cognition, it's about identity, efficacy, and self-worth. And it's not just technology for individuals, it's collaborative technology for family, community, caregivers. And that was illustrated very strongly by the PhD thesis of Mike Wu, finished a few years ago, and that was published in, I believe, in Kai and Participatory Design. The goal is not just about prosthetics, but about the rehabilitation of health and the preservation of health. And it's obviously multidisciplinary, and this is not work that can be done in the lab. It's got to be done. My students have a huge burden, because I ask them not just to build compelling prototypes, but to make it robust enough to take it out and try it with real users in real environments, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of other research challenges in this area that haven't been in the topics I've discussed. Remembering important objects, remembering to take them with you, and finding lost objects is one that one of Gregory Abad's students started to work on about 10 or 12 years ago, and I believe is still not solved. Recalling names is one that we've dabbled at a little, but we haven't solved. There's been a fair amount of technology using things like Connect and other things to help people who have walking conditions but the notion of being able to monitor your walking in real environments and detect both trouble spots with the human, like something wrong with the way your leg is working, or a problem that's caused by the environment, bumps, things you could trip on, is very interesting. And then finally, there's the phrase neuroplasticity, and I don't have time to go through it in detail, but neuroplasticity relates to the notion that our brains are not, as they used to be thought, sort of pretty well set by about age 4 or 5, and then yes, we could cram more information in, but you know, if we had an IQ of 120, that's pretty well where we would stay. But there's increasing evidence that that even late in life, if the brain gets what some people call insults to it, like a gunshot wound, and we've seen several cases of that, unfortunately, in the last few years, where people have gunshot wounds and start to do remarkable recoveries. And it's partly because of neuroplasticity and the ability for the mind to increase its what some call cognitive reserve to be resilient in the face of adversity. And so I believe I don't have the time to go through a description of or my views of the so-called brain fitness industry, but there's a brain fitness industry now that believes that you can build these little exercises, and if you just sit in front of your Nintendo device or your whatever for a half hour a day, you will get smarter, or you'll be able to delay cognitive decline. And what I believe is the interesting challenge is to harness our abilities to stay mentally sound through conversation, through exercise, through normal everyday activities, even through playing classical games like Scrabble or poker or bridge or chess. Will be better for us than these same brain fitness exercises. A brief plug, as I faced 25 years ago when Bill Buxton and I started teaching HCI, we couldn't find teaching materials to teach from, even though Ben Schneiderman assures me that if I'd looked a little more carefully, his book was almost ready and we could have used it. So that then led us to write some of the early readings collections in HCI, and now there's a new approach to this developed by the same Mike Morgan, this time Morgan and Claypool. And so I'm editing a series of synthesis lectures on assistive rehab and health-preserving technologies. The upper row are volumes actually out, and the bottom row are things that are in preparation. The one on autism is coming out literally any day now. Why do we do this? Well, this is sort of a quiz. How many of these 8 productive, mostly still alive, although not all, senior citizens do you recognize we can't all be Casals or Picassos or Mandelas or Gorbachevs, but I contend that by doing work such as what I've described from others and from our lab, we can enable lots of seniors to have additional years of happy, healthy, contributing lives. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to stay as long as you want for questions and discussion. And I encourage those of you who are out there, if you are out there, and I wish I knew who was out there, that if you know how to text any of the people whose names I mentioned before, you could text in a question or email them a question. Yeah, Mary.
So you talked about a lot of technologies, but I didn't see a lot of results showing that these technologies are actually having a positive impact.
Right, and that's a function of sort of the breadth first approach I chose to take. Let me talk about them, and in many cases the work we've done, is too new, so we don't have really solid results. But I'll talk about the Multimedia Biography case. So in that case, with 12 people, we certainly, first of all, we showed that we did have a relatively efficient production process, and then in the 12 cases, we saw lots of anecdotal evidence in we went and videotaped the people when they looked at the first time the video, the world premiere of the story of their life, and then we had them watch regularly, and then we came 3 months later and 6 months later, and we did see lots of instances, which we counted in many cases, and of people having enjoyment, having engagement, connecting with their family. Let me give you one specific example. There's another group in another continent and another university that has worked on a similar problem about how to use multimedia to engage seniors in reminiscing. And they have argued publicly many times, and I've been in the audience several times and have seen they have argued that you don't want to do individual multimedia, you should do generic multimedia that simply gives you scenes of your city as a way to encourage seniors to reminisce, because they have said it might make you feel bad, it might bring back unhappy memories. So we actually have a count, for example, in the 12 times 3 videos we took of people watching this, of how many times people seem to smile, give verbal explanations of delight or pleasure or whatever, as opposed to the, oh my God, I'm so sad, et cetera, et cetera. And it was something like 15-to-1 in terms of joyful moments. So we do have some data, but not nearly enough. And again, it's very, very hard to do this work. And as you probably recognize, as you're starting to do this work with tracking emotions and affecting emotions, how do you do ecologically valid field research in a way that doesn't disrupt behavior, is ethically sound? I don't know, do you have to go through ethics boards here? Do you have an ethics board at Microsoft?
A minor IRB process.
Okay, a minor IRB process. Well, we have major IRB processes, and when we do the right thing by not just doing work from my laboratory, but collaborating with people at any of the teaching hospitals, then we have to go through ethics at U of T and also at the teaching hospital. So I know students who've been held up for months and months and months with IRBs. So yeah, Jonathan.
Is that about, are the ethics issues about how people react to being involved, or is it PII type issues? Because the PII, both for the research, but even more for deployment, to the degree that I started to get into this, it was a real problem. You start putting video in places where other people might walk into rooms, and you're showing videos where the faces are, it doesn't have the same effect, right? When the faces are blurred out. I'm not. What were the two choices again? In your question? Research and in actual deployment. So one of them is whether things will make people feel depressed and so forth, but the other is just revealing the fact that you're recording information.
Well,
I'm just wondering what you're running into.
Well, we're running into both. And but for the moment, we're dealing with research obstacles, and they're concerned about confidentiality and concerned about privacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the issue of, for example, video surveillance of seniors, what people at Intel have reported, that I've heard them report publicly, is that very often, like if you want to, in so-called smart home technology, which I think has been a bit oversold, and I don't think there are a lot of smart homes yet, which is why in the second part of my talk, I talked about little aspects of a smart home, like monitoring water flow or possible falls, not an entire smart home. What people of Intel have said to me and said publicly, that they've discovered that the senior citizens in whose homes technology might be deployed are much less worried about invasions of their privacy than their adult kids are worried. And so, but there are absolutely critical issues here, and as well as how do you decide when something works well enough to deploy it? Pharmaceuticals, before they deploy a drug, and that's not that they don't have they don't kill lots of people nonetheless, but they still first try it on a few dozen, and then they try it on 100, and then they try it on 1,000, then they try it on hundreds of thousands before. So what's going to happen with technology like this when the FDA or whatever starts to realize these are medical instruments that affect? Will we ever be able to deploy anything? Because we'll never get to try this on thousands of people. I mean, maybe social media you can, but not, or let's say any of the devices that I saw today, the video proxies. Let's say Microsoft decides to commercialize those or find somebody to do it. how are you going to run this on an actual randomized controlled trial with thousands or tens of thousands of people before deploying it? So this leads to interesting kinds of ethical and practical problems. Anyway, other questions, comments? Someone out there? Yes.
So with the life stories thing, how does the multimedia production improve on, or is it different from just having photo albums?
We haven't done that study, and it would be interesting to do this because we got very little money and then never went for follow-on money. I believe, or my speculation is that because we're used to sitting around a TV screen, and because more people can sit around it than around a photo album, there's an increased potential there, although the disadvantage is it's costlier. And I mean, I'm not saying you should do one or the other. I think people should use everything. And then the other thing is, I think where we've only scratched the surface is the potential of social media and the internet to help you gather material from families dispersed over the world, around the world, and thus have a richer experience, including, of course, a dynamic one with video and not just with photo albums. But I wish my parents had saved more photo albums. So, yeah, it was.
So, going back to your point about multidisciplinary involvement and collaboration, and to your question about research that shows the effectiveness. So I feel like that literature does exist outside of HCI, in speech pathology or rehab medicine or cognitive rehabilitation. And I guess having now worked in kind of both sides of the coin, I don't see a lot of that collaboration that I would expect to see. See kind of HCI people doing their work and then the people in health or education doing some of the same work, but I'm just wondering if you know of examples where these kind of collaborations are starting to take place a little more.
Well, there are certainly examples. I mean, I think of on the West Coast, Oregon Health and Sciences University group under Jeff Kay, I think really has a superb collection of sort of technical and medical expertise. Alex Michaelides' group does it. We try, but it's hard to get people to make the commitment to, because if you're an assistant professor of neurology or something, you probably have to be pretty courageous to say, okay, I'm going to go and spend a significant amount of my research time working on some crazy new stuff with technology, as opposed to doing the kinds of things that others in the field have done before. So there are disciplinary boundaries. There are cultural differences between the disciplines in terms of how they share knowledge. Jonathan has written a lot on this. I mean, in Chi, we go into these shootouts once every 3 months, in which we know 80% of the papers will be knocked out, or maybe if it's CSCW, a more enlightened process now, only 70%. Whereas most medical disciplines use journals for that kind of shootout and say, okay, we want you all to come to the meeting of the Alzheimer's Association, and you'll submit abstracts, and as long as the abstract seems moderately coherent and on topic, we'll accept it. So one of the reasons I'm editing this series for Morgan and Claypool is my hope is to bridge these disciplinary chasms and get people crossing. And the most recent one that's about to come out by Julie Kienst locally, and Jillian Hayes and Gregory Abount and Matthew, I forget his last name, in Boston, really, it looks to me, speaks to technology people and autism people and draws on the literature from all these disciplines. And even the literature is in its own silos. I mean, there's the ACM Digital Library, and there's PubMed, and there's so it's really hard to bridge those.
I feel like the
field of health informatics is changing that a lot, though. That's where I'm seeing a lot of crossover. And doctors are very willing to work with health informatics students, and they're very well trained at HCI. So UW is a great example of that.
Well, thank you all for coming, and Ron will stick around afterwards in case anyone wants to come chat in a more one-on-one environment and kind of hang out over there. Thank you.
And if anyone is still out there and not watching the Red Sox and the Tigers, send in a question.